Okay, well, welcome everybody and good afternoon and a very warm welcome. I'm Janice Goldstraw-White, one of Martin Gill's colleagues at Perpetuity, and I'll be chairing today's session. And today, I'm reliably informed, is our 165th Thought Leadership webinar. And today's topic is, how else can security contribute to preparing for the worst? As many of you know, we're here every week, usually at this time on a Thursday afternoon, examining a topic of central interest to the prevention of crime. And the idea of these thought leadership webinars is that we critique today in order to get a better type of prevention for tomorrow. And it's not our intention to try and solve all the world's issues in one session. We won't be able to do that. More, we're trying to encourage new thinking and ideas and to debate what's going on and put forward different perspectives to change current practices. And a copy of this webinar will be put on our website hopefully tomorrow, so it can be referred to in the future. All of us involved in security know about the importance of learning from past events and putting in place new procedures as a result of what we find out from these. But how good is the security sector at preparing in advance for things that might happen? What options are out there to help us prepare for the worst, and to what extent are plans tested? And what are the learning points from this? Major incidents such as terrorist attacks are mercifully rare. However, they do occur, unfortunately. And there's guidance out there how to respond, but how well practiced is this in the security sector and the clients implementing these? And what priority is placed on security personnel being able to respond as well as prevent? To what extent are there any identified gaps and limitations, the fault of security professionals? Therefore, the purpose of this webinar today is to discuss whether we rely too much on the hope that security alone will be enough to respond to major incidents. How do we manage our time and effort in preparing against the likelihood of such events occurring? And accepting that these will occur sometime, how could we and should we prepare? And so today we're going to hear from three experts who all have immense expertise in this area, and therefore we look forward to hearing what they're going to tell us about their thoughts on this topic. So without further ado, what I'm going to do in a second is to invite our panel of three to introduce themselves individually, and once they've done that, I'll ask them to make their opening statement. That's going to be 3 minutes or so when they get to say whatever they want on this topic. And after that, we'll turn to you, the audience, to ask your questions. So can I encourage you to use your question and answer button at the bottom of your screen? And please try and get your questions in early, and I'll endeavour to include as many as I can in the ensuing discussion. So without any further delay, let's go and meet our panel. Let's go first to Kevin. Kevin, please can you introduce yourself?
Yep, thank you, Janice, and depending where you are in the world, good morning, afternoon, or indeed evening. I'm Kevin Jewell. A brief overview of my background is I was a police officer for 28 years. I retired in 2018, with the majority of my service being in the intelligence arena, and most of this as a detective. From 2005 onwards, I worked predominantly in the areas of counter-terrorism and national security, with the last 3 years of my service being on secondment to the Home Office within the UK government. In this post, I led a team responsible for planning, building and delivering counter-terrorism exercises across the UK. And I was also HMG's advisor on testing and exercising to several countries around the world, helping to build their overall preparedness for dealing with a terrorist attack. And I continued in this role immediately after my retirement from the police service. In the last few years, I've undertaken physical and personnel security projects in Qatar as part of its preparation for the World Cup, and also for both the Department of Health and the UK Health Security Agency. I have my own company, 3PX, which specialises in helping organisations to assure their emergency response plans through testing and exercising. Thank you, Janice.
Okay, thank you very much then, Kevin. We'll now go to Kiva. Kiva, please introduce yourself.
Certainly. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kiva Gilchrist, and I am the Learning and Development Manager within the Links International Group. I work predominantly with Perpetuity ARC, who deliver a range of security and risk management programs from levels 2 all the way through to level 7 and our MSc program, the MSc in International Security and Risk Management. My background is predominantly learning and development. So I've worked in the field for 10 years, specifically in security and risk management for 8. I work with a range of subject matter experts, directors, and also learners from a range of different disciplines. And we work with security related subject matter. My own qualifications include my undergraduate degree from the University of Stirling in criminology and sociology. I focused my dissertation with my honours undergraduate programme on the An Garda Síochána and security within the police force when it comes to dealing with communities. And then I focused my MSc in International Security and Risk Management, again on policing, but in terms of public versus private policing and boundary management.
Okay, thank you, Kiva. Interesting. I'm sure we'll be coming back to a number of those topics when we get into our discussion later. Without further ado, I should go to Ben. Ben, can you please introduce yourself?
Thank you, Janice. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Ben Green. I am currently the Director of Events and Venues for Carlisle Support Services. I've spent 23 years in the venues and events world within the United Kingdom. I've worked at a number of leading football and cricket venues during my time, along with the All England Lawn Tennis and Croquet Club. I've held leading operational roles within those 23 years, and linked to that, I have a health and safety qualification.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben. Thank you to all the panel there. I'm sure we're going to have an interesting discussion there. So without further ado, we'll invite the panelists to make their opening statements, 3 minutes when they get to say whatever they want to. And don't forget, if you'd like to ask a question, please use the question answer button at the bottom of your screen. And I'll endeavour to include, as I said, as many as I can in this session. So without further ado then, we'll go back to Kevin. Kevin, please, can we have your 3-minute opening statement, please?
Certainly. Thank you, Janice. So let's work on the basis then of preparing for the worst and those scenarios where, for whatever reason, security has not been able to prevent an incident from occurring in the first place, or has maybe only managed to reduce its impact. As has been mentioned, we do need to accept that major incidents will happen. At the top end of that scale are terrorist attacks, and we should always be mindful of the IRA statement to authorities after the Brighton bombing, when they said, you have to be lucky all the time, we only have to be lucky once. So whether it's a terrorist attack or other type of incident, security operatives are likely to be the first on scene, and by their very nature want to do what they can to assist. For me personally, this was evidenced again recently by security personnel operating at the COVID-19 testing sites, assisting with emergency incidents completely unrelated to their main tasking. These included coming to the aid of a police officer who had been stabbed in the neck, giving life-saving first aid at the scene of an RTC, and talking down from a bridge a person who was threatening suicide. This undoubtedly shows that when the worst happens, there is a significant role to be played by security staff, and indeed probably a reliance and expectation. So, do we rely too much on the hope that security alone will be enough? My view in relation to this is not necessarily a case of consciously relying just on security, but more to do with omitting to think on a wider basis, from planning all the way through to testing. We need to fully consider the involvement of other persons or teams in planning the response and seeking to assure effectiveness. At this point, I would also put forward how it is just as important to remember that the role security plays and its effectiveness can actually be hindered by others if plans are not joined up, understood and practiced. Most organisations have plans to deal with emergencies. However, it's not unusual for organisations to place security some way down the list when it comes to investment, both in terms of money and time. When this is combined with the lack of joined up planning and testing and exercising, this could be seen as somewhat of a paradox if, when the worst does happen, it's security that are expected to respond. If this is already the case, there are only going to be even greater challenges in the future when, for example, new legislation such as the Protect Duty comes into being. So when the worst happens, it is a challenging, traumatic, and often life-changing experience for those involved. That said, there is still an opportunity for personal, reputational, and financial harm to be reduced if cohesive, effective, and assured plans are in place. Security has without doubt a vital part to play in this, but the responsibility should not be theirs alone. A proactive approach needs to be taken with organisations and their security providers working together. Plans need to be created collaboratively, tested in an introspective manner, and improvements made where necessary. The likelihood, and indeed the hope, is that the plans will never be needed, with the financial benefits and lives possibly saved being unquantifiable. However, a reliance on just having a plan and people doing their best is not an option. Janice?
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. Some interesting areas brought up there that I'm sure we'll discuss in further detail. Just remind you, if you want to send any questions in, please use your question and answer button at the bottom. And now we'll go over to Kiva. Kiva, can we please have your opening statement?
Of course, thank you very much. So ordinarily when I'm conducting research, I typically tend, without intending to, seek towards finding limitations. But in this particular aspect of my research, I did actually have an overwhelmingly positive list of facets that are included within this particular topic. So what I'd like to state firstly is that the very nature of security as a noun is the state of being free from danger or threat. But it is my opinion that this noun is multifactorial. So it is dependent on a range of different disciplines and interagency workings. So within those, we also have interdisciplinary works that includes training. So training first and foremost has taken us a long way towards preparedness. I'm from a training background myself, and having had a look at training materials develop over the course of the last 10 years, we've had a range of different methodologies that have emerged. I know Kevin on this particular webinar has got great experience of simulation and desktop training, but we also have classroom, virtual classroom and online training that has changed the way that we can actually incorporate all people within an organization in our striving to achieve security, that state of being free from danger or threat or feeling that way. So it's multidisciplinary in the sense that we involve a lot of different agencies. So focusing a little bit more on that, I think it's fair to say that we've also developed more into the term that security should be the responsibility of everybody involved. And when we look at security itself, we also must think about our security risk assessments. So in terms of the risk assessment process, we always believe that mitigation methods must be commensurate with the level of threat. And looking at recent examples, we have the unfortunate event that unfolded this week, which was the shooting in Texas in the school. Now, when you look at the mitigation methods that were in place there, it is reported that there was a security officer in the school actually working on that day. So the mitigation method was having that security officer as a first response. However, as we know, 19 children were killed and 2 members of staff as well. So is this mitigation method enough? Was this strive towards having security mitigation methods in place enough? My personal view was that it wasn't. It's the gun culture, but we can discuss that, and I'm sure that there will be comments made by the listeners. I'd love to hear those. But do we rely too much on security? Do we rely that it will be enough? The hope security will be enough? I think that we should look at training all within an organization. We should move towards plan, train and review methodologies and look at layers of, look at concepts like layered security. But I think focusing on the fact that all within an organization should be trained to a certain level and that security is the responsibility of everyone and it's multi-agency and multifaceted pretty much negates the fact that we look at security as being an isolated standalone responsibility of one entity, but it is in fact the responsibility of everyone. So not only is it multifaceted in nature, but it's in practice as well.
Hey, thank you very much, Kiva. That was very interesting as well. Before we move on to Ben, any questions? Once again, please remind you, use your question answer button. Right, Ben, we'll move over to you then. Can we have your opening statement, please?
Yeah, thank you, Janice. When I consider security and from the background that I come from, I think before you can consider the word security and creating a secure environment, it starts with having a safe venue. Before you can ever deliver any operation, you must have that ethos of a health and safety culture so that people feel safe. Then that allows you to overlay the various and detailed security requirements you have for the venue that you operate. That is massively important. It goes hand in hand. there also must be a clarity of what security is. And linked to some of the points that my fellow panelists have made, it is all of us. Everybody can play a role in creating that secure environment, a collaborative approach. Also, people shouldn't fear security. People, you use that word and people are suddenly, oh, security. But it is working together. It's having those trained experts and staff within your venue. It's having the robust built environment. And at times, sometimes doing the most simple of things to create that secure environment that everybody operates in. It's about awareness, engagement with not just your internal stakeholders, but your neighbours, your external stakeholders, your partners, your commercial partners, the visitors coming to your site, and where it's required, the blue light services. All the best venues in the world that are secure have that engagement piece. It's very much about how they plan to deal with major events and at times disasters. We must continue to learn lessons from the past, but also not fear change and adaptation and being flexible and agile in this changing world. Doing the same thing that you've done time and time again and expecting a different outcome at times just feels like insanity. You must have that ability to adapt your plans. Many of us on this call would have sat in desktop exercises, myself included, and I've seen many examples of excellent and robust work. But probably in the current time now, there's probably not enough done around actually testing those plans, actually getting them out, using them, testing them, having a test events, and making sure that the theory that you put together actually works. Also, the ability to share best practice. Venues are all facing similar challenges day in, day out. Industries, sporting venues, event holders, again, trying to create that consistency of approach. Finally, it is about investing in your security operation constantly. It is an ongoing requirement. It's an ongoing need. The return on investment in terms of a safe and secure venue against reputational damage, or in some cases damaging and life-threatening breaches, is not worth considering. And again, we are asking a huge amount of our security teams in this day and age, and it must be continue to have training, auditing, and things such as the protect duty to allow standards to be raised. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben. We'll move over now to the questions, and I've got a couple in from the audience, which I'm going to ask in a little bit. We've still got plenty of time for questions, so if you've got a burning question, please put it on the question and answer button at the moment, and I'll come back to that. So just turning now back to the panelists, I'd probably like to ask each of you in turn, I'll go in the same order to be fair, is when we do have a sort of major event and whatever, what do you think is one of the things that we're not learning for, that we do the worst? So if I can come to you first, Kevin, on that.
Yeah.
Just pick up like a main one or two areas that you think are where we fall down big time, and we continually fall down on it.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's any commonalities, because after major incidents, there's often debriefs. So it's a tricky one to answer. I think the problem, the inherent problem, is that debriefs happen, whether it's an informal debrief, whether it's a full one. Unlikely to be an informal one if it's a major incident. Inquiries take place, and one of my bugbears is when people use the term lessons learned, because lessons aren't learned until they are implemented, embedded, and have been tested again. So I very much go down the line of lessons identified. But going back to the question, major incidents, that they happen, and issues, whether it be inquiries, whether it be internal, are identified. Things are put in place, but as we've all alluded to, things move on as well. So they need to constantly be revisited to make them current. So there isn't one thing, in my opinion, that we constantly fall down on. We are very good actually at debriefing. What we're not so good at is maintaining things and maintaining the plans in advance of something happening.
I think that I can see that, and I can see sometimes there can be a complacency within organisations that just because they've actually got that plan and written it down, and they know they've got that plan, that they're quite happy with that. Whereas, as you say, things move on, things change, risks and threats alter and circumstances alter, and probably some organisations get a little bit complacent there, don't go back to those plans and update them for new threats that are certainly, which can be very changing at times. People don't go back to those and update them. Okay, thank you, Kevin. And just go to you, Kiva. Any, what would you say are some of the main areas, if you think there's a main area?
My computer did freeze out a little bit, so if you could repeat the original question, that'd be most appreciated.
What I was actually asking is when a major incident occurs, is there any particular area that we see continually going wrong that we're not really learning from, that we just see time and time again?
If we consider experiences and events as a continual learning cycle, I think that we should replicate that in our training. So we should have a circular motion as opposed to a linear process. So it's the same with communication, it's the same with transparency. If we view things in a linear process, yes, we get from A to B, but there's not often the cycle back to A with that review process being done. So stemming on from what Kevin did say there, if we look to the past and consider those events as opportunities to learn and develop and to improve existing mitigation strategies that we do have in place, and not to be afraid to talk about limitations in a very transparent way involving all. And this is where I'm driving home the aspect that security is the responsibility of all. If we do view it as a circular process as opposed to a linear process, that's where I feel that we can best learn, and the process doesn't necessarily have to be disrupted too much for the future. It's a continual one.
And why, just coming back to you before I go to them, and why do you think that we're sort of sticking with this sort of linear approach as opposed to a more cyclical approach, which you're proposing would be better?
I think it's a cultural thing in many stances. I mean, we celebrate ourselves when we go from A to B, and we don't often take the time to look back and actually gain some thought on what we learned and how we learned it. I mean, soft skills when training are just as important as the subject matter. And when you're talking about simulation training and you're also talking about, say, desktop exercises, one of the biggest soft skills that you develop in that process is actually communication. And as we well know, so communication is never linear, it's always circular. So why we can't replicate that when we're looking at learning from past events and implementing that into our training experiences and our training processes, that's the way that the world works. So we should replicate that when we're training to keep it as close to real life as possible.
Indeed. Okay, thank you, Kiva. If I could come over to you now, Ben, what was the area you'd like to highlight, if any?
I think it's slightly linked to Kevin's point, but the ability to test your plans. A lot of venues nowadays, and especially with what the world's faced in the last couple of years, and now everything, as we keep hearing, is back to normal, the commercial pressure for venues to deliver their day-to-day business, and often venues go from major event to major event to major event with very little time at sometimes between those eventualities, and having that ability to take stock to avoid complacency coming into fruition is something that we're seeing within the industry. And I think how the industry is changing and some of the challenges around ensuring you have effective, qualified, trained, audited staff at the moment is certainly some of the challenges that we're seeing with that ability to consistently deliver. And I think consistent is a massively important word when you're dealing with security. It never switches off, the ability to deliver a secure venue. So again, I think there are a number of facets that come out, but at times the own commercial pressure a venue has to deliver means that you don't always get the time you want to review your plans and make sure they're robust to be able to deliver a major incident.
Hey, thank you, Ben. I've got a question now. I'm sorry, I'm going to come back to you first, Ben. It's more applicable to you, I think. And then I'm going to come to you, Kevin. Matthew asks, do you feel venues are taking the right steps at the right speed in preparation for protect duty becoming legislation? Are we behind the curve for when it happens?
I think a number of venues are ahead of the curve. I think it's a mix. I think everybody's heard the protect duties coming. We've seen now that a bit more detail from the government around the consultation. I think more can be done. The industry is at a point where it has to change. We have to take heed of the lessons learned and some of the tragedies in the past. So I think there's a real mix out there. I think some venues are generally concerned about what the protect duty will mean. It's going to deal with a number of the issues around the grey area that exists between venues, local authorities, blue light services. So in answer to that question, I think it's a real mix out there. And again, it's related to the pressures on the venues and where the venues are since coming back from COVID-19.
Okay, thank you, Ben, for that. Kevin, have you got any further comments on that, or what's your view of people's readiness for Protect?
I think it's an interesting one in that, a lot of, whether it be stadia or locations that are already holding a large capacity of people, they have good security. The issue comes back to a lot of the time as we've just discussed around sort of testing plans. Where the protect duty, I think, will be most impacted is actually in areas that at the moment don't have security, don't have a responsibility to do it, and it will lay that out quite firm, or probably lay that out quite firmly. So I don't think stadiums, arenas, personally, and Ben knows far more than I do with his events background, I think they've got a good start because of what they've already had to do. It's also interesting because again, my personal view is that the location, that there's already a lot of locations outside sport that maybe don't do as much as they could to assure their plans. So they're already not doing that, and that's before that number of locations increased when the protect duty comes in, where they also got a responsibility.
Do you want to just elaborate a little bit more on that? Sort of the areas, what more you think they could do? Yeah,
so when we're talking about, at the moment, let's go with shopping centres for argument's sake. Okay. There's already a lot of work to be done around what they should be doing in practicing their plans, assuring their plans, revisiting them. So, and there's going to be what I would call kind of more potentially pop-up locations that are starting from complete scratch, that are going to have the protect duty thrust upon them, because lots of people are going to open air festival, for example, where they will start, say, from almost a blank sheet of paper to get everything in place. Whereas at the other end of the scale, you have stadia and you have other populated areas where they've already got some robust or some plans in place. But my concern, if I can sort of go to that strength, is around locations that at the moment don't have any responsibility to do any type of security, but attract a lot of people.
And what it's just a final question, what might ask, obviously one of the things we said we'd look at in the webinar is, and for those in the audience that are not so familiar with this area, what information is out there for organisations to prepare?
Information for the protect duty?
Yes, and for incidents generally.
There's an awful lot of information which I would thoroughly recommend on the CPNI website. That is a very good source for organisations to look at. The protect duty specifically, I think some people are genuinely waiting to see what kind of depth it will go to. Others are kind of almost ignoring it a little bit and waiting to see what the definitive is, to see whether they'll be affected or not. But right. Standing strong anyway is CPNI is the website that I would thoroughly recommend for people to look at.
Sure, yeah, that covers most things. Obviously just for those in the audience that are here out of general interest as opposed to interest on this specific topic. Kiva, if I can come to you, if you were able to change training in this area, what was it you would look at then?
Change training in this area?
Yes, you said you train, and you said you've got different methods that Kevin has used. What kind of, could you outline what you do in your area?
Yes, so in our particular area, we do a lot of risk and security management related training, but we also cater for in-house training as well. So we take desktop exercises, we do simulated events. So we would look at a particular concern that a client might have, be it, you know, security of a particular event. And we would build that into our training. So it is not only theoretical, but also best practice. So we would take elements of criminology and risk and enterprise security risk management, and we would look at the theory of that and then try and simulate or build an assignment or a piece of work that learners would have to do in order to replicate that theory and take it into best practice. So you're actually developing the skills to not only take that theory and put it into, you know, how you would actually translate that in a real life event, but you're also developing the skills to be able to do that through better communication, opening up reporting lines and understanding hierarchies and lines of management. I don't think I would necessarily change the training. I think it can certainly be developed, and that's the case with all training. Training is a constant. It's not something that sits and festers. It's something that's constantly being updated and informed. And that's why it's so important for the security arena to remain transparent, so that, you know, the training courses can suitably deliver what it is that is out there at the moment. And stemming on from that, it's also very much informed by professional groups such as yourselves, and also professional membership associations that keep the message through, you know, new guidelines, policies, standards, etc. Very transparent, very open. They have think tanks that invite others to comment on them. And we can also build those into training courses as well, so that education is actually can be achieved by anybody and can be accessed by anybody. And I think that's key.
Thank you, Kiva. I mean, one of the themes that's coming out is certainly in your opening statements was very much so there's an over-reliance on security. And we all know that it's not just security's responsibility, it's everyone's responsibility at a particular level. I just come to each of you in the same order that we did the presentations and say, what could we do to actually change this culture of, you know, that it's security's responsibility? What do you think we could do within organisations to actually raise this more? Kevin, if I could come to you first on that question.
Sure. I think that there's two parts to it, and we're all pretty much in agreement, I think, in that security isn't just security's issue. There needs to be a whole culture and awareness, not being afraid to challenge, realising that, you know, everyone's got a part to play in an organisation. That's around preventative, but as we've focused on a little bit as well, and kind of the world I generally come from is also what can people do to make, if the worst happens and it's a really bad day, what can people do and know their role to make it a little less bad, because, you know, it's going to be terrible already, but, you know, things in advance of preparation and people knowing their role, whether it's to do with what part you play in a lockdown, for example. If there's, you know, a nice person marauding around the building, just getting those plans, which I come back to my opening sort of wording that I said, you know, everyone needs to be involved in the planning. We can't assume that someone else is going to deal with it. Everyone needs to know their part.
Okay, if I can come to you now, Kiva, same question.
Yes, so I go back to training and transparency. I think that it's very important to make everybody in an organisation feel responsible and also invested in the objectives of the company. So one of the objectives of security is always to achieve the bottom line. So if we can be transparent with everybody in the premises and in the organisation about how security effectively helps to achieve their bottom line, and also what it stands to do, it protects assets, including people. So if we can actually get our people invested in security, we can make them feel as though they are major players in what is everybody's responsibility, that is security. And that comes through appropriate training as well. If we can ensure that all of our organisation is trained in some capacity, obviously level appropriate to their roles and responsibilities, but if everybody is trained to such a level that they feel invested, they feel responsible, and they take ownership for their own actions and also self-surveillance and surveillance of others within their zones, then I think it's very important to do so.
Okay, thank you, Kiva. And Ben, to you.
Yeah, definitely around awareness, and also lifting on the lid on what people can actually do to help within an organisation. And that is very important, that the consistency from the top of the organization down to the bottom of the organization, that the same approach is taken. And sometimes it is the simplest things that if everybody, 100% of your staffing teams do it, for example, everybody wearing a pass, so that somebody not wearing a pass stands out. Sometimes it's those simple things and doing those well that then improve the overall securing of a site. And yeah, as Kevin has said, not to be afraid to challenge. It's noticing in the areas where you work, noticing that something's different, something that's out of place, and alerting your security teams to that. And again, both other panelists said the same, knowing your role and what you can actually do a part of that. It is one big complex jigsaw, sometimes of larger organizations. And if everybody plays their part, it's amazing what can be done without having to spend millions of pounds on certain systems and everything else like that.
Do you think this message is actually coming out from management and the board about this? You know, you said about passes, but we all know that the jokes about people not having their passes or breaking the rules or people leaving doors open. And who is it to sort of really drive this and set the standard?
I think it's everybody. I've worked in a number of organizations where it comes from the top, but I've also worked in other organizations where it's driven from the bottom up to the top. Yeah. So I think everybody has a role. You know, you never travel to an airport or get through an airport without a passport. So why shouldn't everybody wear a pass? It creates that, again, that identity that somebody's in your venue that hasn't got a pass. Then you've got that ability to challenge. So yes, I do get the people that laugh about it, but it is sometimes security doesn't need to be overcomplicated. Sometimes it is doing the simple things consistently day in, day out, which sets the very top venues that are all secure up from the other venues. Yeah,
and I think that's good. You know, bottom up, top down approach. It's going to meet in the middle, and we're going to get this all covered. Just the final sort of round of questions now. Then, Kiva, you mentioned earlier about the sort of gun culture, etc., and we've had a couple of comments on that. If I just read you a couple of those. One person has actually said, what can be done to mitigate things like these school shootings? More security or less guns? Any thoughts on that? And another comment is that they believe that Americans think that the solution is more good people with guns. How do we finally get the message across that being a good person is not a constant, but the presence of guns, and the only solution is to get rid of the guns? Would you like to make any sort of comments on those two?
Sure. I mean, I'm by no means an expert in gun laws or gun culture, but I can certainly comment on it. And I did speak about it today because it's a very emotive subject. And I think, you know, coming from the UK, where guns are not prevalent or as prevalent, it's one that shocks us. So I did bring that up just to, you know, add a bit of conversation in regards to it, because I'm interested to hear what other people think. In regards to the gun culture, I did read something whilst doing a little bit of research for this webinar in regards to arming teachers with guns as a response. So we did have the mitigation method in place that I mentioned over the last 10 years in the wake of the likes of Columbine and Sandy Hook, which you think would be enough as examples of why gun laws should be revisited and the gun culture should move from trigger happy to potentially a little bit more policed. But that's my opinion. I did read that there has been a lot more there's been more security officers in place within schools, predominantly just security officers for schools. So those mitigation strategies are being put into place, but obviously this has been a failing in some sense. Otherwise 19 children wouldn't be dead today. So in regards to changing this and giving good people good guns, that's personally not the way that I feel that we should go. I'm not sure how Kevin and Ben feel about that in regards to maybe arming teachers as well in response.
I mean, it is a huge issue that has been talked about. All the time guns are available. If someone's got ill intent, they will use it as a weapon of choice. You know, it is no different in many ways too. If we look at going back to you know, the call for Islamic radicalisation, where they want harm done, You know, they were openly saying, doesn't matter if you use a knife, doesn't matter if you use a car or a vehicle, you know, go and kill people. So, well, they will use something if people are intent. The problem for me is all the time guns are available, which is why, you know, they've got a huge challenge, which is a bit of a cop-out maybe, but you know, mitigation-wise, the only way you're going to stop continued school shootings is to have almost make them like a prison with a gate around them, so people can't get in unless they go for a checkpoint. But then, arguably, they will go to one where they can get in, or they'll go to the shopping centre. So mitigation-wise, it is very limited options, and that option is the fence around it all and have an armed guard on there.
Hey, thank you, Kevin. Ben, did you want to make any comments or not?
I agree with a lot of what both the panelists of Kiva and Kevin have said. This for me sits, and I'm no US political expert, but this sits with their constitution and around the laws that govern guns. And I agree with Kevin, the only way you can absolutely mitigate or try and mitigate is make them into fortresses. But for me, it starts with the readily available that anybody can walk in and they don't have the control measures.
Okay, thank you. So just before we wrap up then, I'm just going to return to you all in turn and sort of just if you could give me a couple of summing up sentences. I suppose we'll look at it from the perspective is if unfortunately we did have a major incident today, in London, for example, would we be ready? And if we're not, what areas, what do you think we would fall down on? So I'll come to you in the usual order. Kevin, come to you first.
Yeah, major incident in London, for argument's sake, we know I know the blue light services train together, practice together, have joint operating principles. What we don't have is that, or a lot of organisations don't have, is that joint operation before the emergency services arrive as to who is going to do what in response to it. So for me, Janice, it's very much kind of two issues around security, stopping it, and then if something does happen, as I said earlier, is how can you make the best of a bad situation before the emergency services arrive?
Indeed, and like I say, I agree with you. It is this area before the emergency services where people, from the research I've done, seems to fall down in terms of roles and responsibility and general communications. And some of that is quite basic to actually train and learn. And there's no reason for some of it to go wrong, actually. Okay, I'll just quickly move on to you, Kiva, for a final sort of summing up.
Yes, so my final statement would be based on the fact that training is of utmost importance here. I mean, we discussed that security is the responsibility of everybody. It is a multifactorial noun. So we're trying to achieve being free from danger and threat. In order to do this, it has to be multifactorial, it has to be multi-agency, and it has to use a multitude of different disciplines. And that really goes back to the purpose of it being the responsibility of everyone. And training is the only way that we can bridge that gap, involving everybody and making everybody aware of their role, their responsibility, and their duty of care to their organisations and their fellow colleagues when we're protecting each other.
Okay, thank you, Kiva. And then just finally to you, Ben.
Yeah, it's very much for me, it's collaboration. The best venues, regardless of what industry they work in, collaborate internally, externally, sharing of knowledge, sharing of experience, again, learning from the past. But I suppose my final point is develop your plans and training through live exercises, and that key piece about what you can do before the blue light services turn up, massively crucial.
Okay, thank you, Ben. And can I say thank you to all our panelists today. Thank you very much for your statements and contribution. If I didn't get to any of your questions, then I'm very sorry about that. I think I managed to include most of them, even though I combined a couple as well. Just a few notices before we close on time. We've got a number of awards open at the moment. So we've got the US OSPAs, the Benelux and Canadian OSPAs, they all close in July. We've got the Economic Crime Awards that are open. They close on the 8th of August. And the 15th of August, the Cyber OSPAs close. So get your nominations in there. And then also closing both on the same date, on the 22nd of August, we've got the South African OSPAs and the German OSPAs. And in terms of what's happening in terms of webinars and other events, we have the New Zealand OSPAs taking place in real life tomorrow in Auckland. We've got the webinar next week. Now, I'll just point out one. It's on a Tuesday because we've got the bank holiday on Thursday, and it's also at a different time in the morning at 11 a.m. due to international speakers, and I'll be chairing that. And that's about what is the true cost of economic crime. We'll be looking at the various methods we use to calculate that, and does that take into account all the true costs of the impacts of this awful crime for in terms of economics on individual people. 9th of June, we've got 2 events going on. Protecting luxury goods is security winning is going to be our webinar. And we also have the Romanian OSPAs taking place. So please keep your eye out on our websites and our emails that come round and sign up for any of those. Thank you once again to the panelists and to you, the audience, for sending in your questions and being here today. And I also thank Hannah and Shrey, our technical people in the background, and for all the admin they do to make these webinars possible. And as we always say, wherever you are in the world, please stay safe, and until next time. Thank you.